tape player as a gift when he turned 16. That made everything different. He began to record music at home, experimenting with sounds, harmonies, and group voices. He would record his friends playing the piano with his friends. Brian was so good at learning Bach and Beethoven that even his high school music teacher told him so. What he did in school also showed what was in his heart. He wrote an article called My Philosophy for a class called Senior Problems. He talked about his dream, which was to become famous in singing. He was already on his way. The dream starts with the first real band. At his high school's autumn arts show, Brian had his first big moment on stage. He played with his brother Carl and cousin Mike Love. Brainy even gave the group the name Carl and the Passions to get Carl to join. They sang songs by four freshmen, Dion and the Belmonts. A classmate named Al Jardine saw that show and would balk, "Hey, I'm no longer scared of. I was really scared of my dad when I was a kid. He used to hit me with a belt. I used to get beat up a lot. He was more than just a beach boy," Brian Wilson. He made their sound so good. This person helped shape the sound of a whole age with songs like God Only Knows and Good Vibrations. But behind those beautiful sounds was a life full of sadness, pain, and struggles. He had problems with his mental health for many years. Fans watched as he slowly dropped out of the public eye. Then the sad news that he had died. New and shocking facts from his autopsy have come to light just when everyone thought they knew everything. Come with us as we look at Brian Wilson's life, his impact, and the sad truth about his last days. A singing childhood that wasn't always good. Brian Douglas Wilson was born in Inglewood, California, on June 20th, 1942. She and Murray Wilson had him as their first child. His dad was a machine operator, but he also wrote songs in his spare time. Brian had two younger brothers named Carl and Dennis. The family moved to Hawthorne, California, after Dennis was born. But it wasn't easy for Brian to grow up. Murray, his dad, was known to be strict and dangerous at times. In his autobiography, Brian later said that he was mean. Still, Murray did a lot to get people to play music at home. He encouraged his kids to try out their musical skills. Brian was very good at singing from a very young age. He could hear a tune once and then play it back. It was a time when baby Brian could hum, when the caissons go rolling along after hearing only a few lines. He also sang solos at church and took accordion classes for 6 weeks. People said he had perfect pitch. A vocal group called the Four Freshmen was a big impact on Brian. He loved the way they sang together and practiced their songs over and over. He once said, "I learned every song they did in the end." Brian would play his record player and listen to short pieces of their music. He would then try to copy the sound on his piano note by note. In this way, he taught himself how to blend sounds so well. He loved the radio very much. His favorite station was KFWB, and he loved all kinds of music, especially R&B. His brother Carl introduced him to that style, and their uncle taught him how to play guitar and piano. These styles helped Brian become a musician, but his journey was just starting. Learn to read and play music by heart. Brian started making songs early on and kept getting better quickly. He changed the words to the old song, "Oh, Susanna," when he was only 9 years old. That was one of his first times writing a song. Brian began learning songs by ear every day when he was 12 years old, and his family got an upright piano. He never went to piano lessons. He didn't look or ask for help. He just played and listened. One of Brian's dad's friends also taught him how to read and write music. He sang with other people at school and at home. He showed his brothers the way and taught them how to sing together. They would practice these parts over and over, and each time they got better. He still loved music after school. In fact, that's when it all began. He played the piano all the time and kept listening to how the four students played. That high voice. One of the singers, Bob Flanagan, taught him. Brian once said that Bob Flanagan's loud voice made me feel like I knew him. I learned how to sing high from him. Brian had a normal teen life in high school too. He was the center for his school's football team and, in his last year, joined the cross-country team as well. On the weekends, he cleaned for his dad's business, and for a short time, he worked at a jeweler's shop. But he always put music first in his life. Brian got a 2-track become an important part of Brian's life. Brian began going to El Camino College in Los Angeles in 1960. He took classes in both psychology and music. He didn't want to go to college, though. He didn't like how his teachers thought less of pop music. He quit after about 18 months. Brian wrote a song called Surfer Girl around this time. Dion and the Belmonts' song, When You Wish Upon a Star, gave him ideas for it, he said. After the fact, some of his high school friends said Brian had written other songs before that one. Surfer Girl would still be a big part of the Beach Boys story. But first, the group had to come together. all the way up to the Beach Boys. It all began in the autumn of 1961. Brian got together with brother Dennis, cousin Mike Love, friend Al Jardine, and their brother Carl. The Pendletons was their name for the group. The name came from the wool shirts they wore a lot. Brian got song ideas from Dennis, who surfs with his family. Brian said, "I wasn't into surfing at all in the end. I learned all the slang I needed to write the songs from my brother Dennis. I wrote the songs, and he was the surfer." Surfin' was their first song. Brian and Mike wrote it together, and it was recorded by a small company called Candix Records. It was a big hit in its own country and even made it to number 75 on the Billboard lists. Candix changed their name to the Beach Boys without telling the group. And that was the start of music history. At the Ritchie Valens Memorial Dance on New Year's Eve 1961, they played their first big live show. Brian got a new electric bass right before that show. He quickly learned how to play, and Al moved to playing rhythm guitar. It wasn't easy, though. Candix Records ran out of money, so they sold the band's records to another company. Murray, who was their father and boss, broke the deal. Brain was already working on a new project while Surfin' was still falling off the charts. He began making tracks with a musician in the area named Gary Usher. They worked on songs like 409 and Surfin' Safari together. Capitol Records took a chance when they heard the tracks. The songs were put out as a record. It worked. Both songs were big hits. The Beach Boys were on their way after that. As things went on, though, Brian Wilson's skills and problems reached a whole new level. The rock star who made the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys signed a 7-year deal with Capitol Records in 1962. They had Nick Venett as their manager. Capitol gave Brian a studio place that he didn't like, so he asked to record somewhere else. Capitol said yes, but the band had to pay for it on their own. Brian was also in charge of producing the record, even though it didn't say his name on it. Brian looked up at Phil Spector, who made the Teddy Bears. He liked Spector's music and business. Brainy once said, "I've always felt like I was more of a man behind the scenes than an entertainer." He worked with musician Gary Usher, and the two of them wrote songs in the style of Phil Spector. Brian also did work with artists in the area. Even though a lot of those early records didn't do well, a song by Rachel and the Revolvers called The Revolution was one of his first projects outside of the Beach Boys. It was written by Brian and Usher together, but Brian wasn't given credit as the writer. Murray, Brian's father, caused problems between him and Usher, and the two quit working together. Brian wrote some more. He did work with Bob Norberg on guitar and Roger Christian as a DJ. Murray started a record company called Safari Records, and in October 1962, it put out The Surfer Moon by Bob and Sherry. Brian was named as a producer for the first time. It was his idea to write their song Humpty Dumpty. However, Brian wasn't done pushing the limits. What he did next would make him a full-time force in the music creation world. Stronger hits and more daring moves. Brian worked on the Beach Boys' second album, Surfin' USA, from January to March 1963. He missed most of the band's live shows to focus on the work. David Marks stepped in for him on those shows. The song Surfin' USA came out in March 1963. It was their first hit in the top 10. It made it to number 2 on the Billboard lists. The Beach Boys became one of the biggest bands in the country because of that. Brian started working with other acts, even though Capitol told him not to. He did work with the pop group Jan and Dean. Brian and Jan Berry wrote Surf City together. In July 1963, it was a big hit. Brad's first #1 song was that one. That song also helped Jan and Dean's success. Not everyone was glad, though. Murray Wilson and Capitol Records didn't like it. Marilyn, Diane, and Ginger, who was their cousin. Brian changed their name to the Honeys and said they were like the Beach Boys for girls. Capitol put out a few Honey songs, but not many people bought them. Brian grew close to the Revell family. From 1963 to 1964, he actually spent most of his time at their house. The Honeys put out He's a Doll in April 1964. Brian was trying to become a creative director for other artists, like Phil Spector. This song showed that. When Brian got back to the Beach Boys, he was finally given credit as the album's producer for Surfer Girl, which was made in the summer of 1963. It came out in September and got to number 7 on the charts. Brian also worked on the car-themed record Little Deuce Coupe, which came out about the same time as Surfer Girl. Al Jardine filled in for Brian on stage because Brian didn't like going on tour. However, Brian had to go back to when Brian worked with other people. He was even told to stop by Murray. Jan and Brian still helped each other with their records. Brian started making music for a girl group called the Revell Sisters as well. They met him at a Beach Boys show. The group was made up of live shows when David Marks quit the band. Brian had written, arranged, or produced 42 songs for other acts by the end of 1963. His work was just beginning, but soon things would change. Brian Wilson was making hits like crazy by 1964. He wrote or helped write more than 24 songs that were played in the US in just a few years. Top 40. He had a lot of big hits, like Surf City in 1963, I Get Around in 1964, Help Me Rhonda in 1965, and Good Vibrations in 1966. He was more than just a singer. Someone who really knew how to use the recording studio like an instrument was him. In rock music, that thought was still new. Brian made changes to the way records were made. He gave artists more in the studio. He had found his spot. As he moved away from the people, his sound changed. But the problems behind the scenes got worse as his songs got freedom than ever to be artistic. But Brian started to pull away from tours even as he got to the top. He was mostly interested in writing and creating. I'm more complicated. Brian kept pushing himself even though things were tough. When he made his big return in the late 1970s, it was almost like he was working on it by himself. Challenges, wins, and a memory that will last. Brian put out the Beach Boys song, Love You, in 1977. It was mostly his work. It was the start of his return. But the road ahead wasn't easy. Eugene Landy, his psychotherapist, worked with him a lot in the 1980s. The partnership was about business and art, but it was also controversial. Brian Wilson started his solo career again with the record Brian Wilson in 1988. He was added to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that same year. But by 1991, he was no longer friends with Landy. Brian stayed busy in the years that followed. He went on tour a lot from 1999 to 2022. It wasn't until 2004 that he finished his long-lost record, Smile. Some of his best reviews as a solo artist came from this version. Brian's work made pop music seem like more than just fun. It might be art. Much music, from hippies to sunshine pop, indie rock, dream pop, and even chill wave, got their start with his sound. He was honored by the Kennedy Center and won 2 Grammys. He was also up for an Emmy and a Golden Globe. He was added to the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2000. Love and Mercy, a movie based on his story, came out in 2014. Brian Wilson is like the Beach Boys, Dennis Wilson once said. He's the band. We bring him messages. He's everything. Always. We're not anything. He's everything. That's it. But that wasn't the end of Brian's story. It would get even more personal. Something that no fan thought would happen. The start of a mind that is upset. Brian Wilson was a genius at making music, but he was having a terrible time behind closed doors. It was found that he had schizoaffective disorder and mild bipolar disorder. Following 1965, he often heard sounds that were not real. He called these sounds heroes and villains, and they would haunt him and make life scary. He said they scared him for life. Brian's friends and family didn't know what was going on at first. Some people thought he was just being emotional or hard to deal with. Others thought his strange behavior was caused by drugs or just the way he was. In 1964, his wife Marilyn took him to see a therapist after a scary flight. The doctor said Brian was just tired and stressed, but there was more to it than that. Brian usually didn't want to go to therapy. Marilyn told him that she had tried many times to help. People who blamed her said she was to blame because she had always pushed him to get the care he needed. Brian said he tried drugs for the first time on a Beach Boys tour. He started hearing voices about a week after taking LSD for the first time. The first amount, which was 125 micrograms of something called pure Owsley, was very strong. The person who sold him family at the time. Brian once asked Bill Wagner, who was in charge of the 4 students, to come to the studio and play something that he hears when he's high on LSD. Brian then played one note. He knew Brian was in big trouble at that point. After the fact, Brian said that LSD made him feel like Jesus. Wagner set him up with a therapist at UCLA, but the doctor didn't think things would get better. He told Wagner, "I don't think he can be saved." By 1966, Brian had admitted that he didn't take pills to party, but to think about himself. He thought the drugs made him smarter. Brian wrote that he didn't take LSD again until he was about 23 years old. His wife thought he took more LSD after that, but she only knew about 2. Someone else said Brian had only ever taken LSD 3 times in his whole life. Brian began to have scary and dark thoughts as his illness got worse. He thought the sounds he heard were demons speaking through other people. He thought those people were out to get him or hurt him. Marilyn was more worried than ever after they had their first child in 1968. Brian was taken to the hospital later that same year. Thorazine is a strong drug used to treat nervousness that the doctors gave him. He may have also gone to therapy, taken lithium, or had shock treatments while he was there, but none of them helped him in the long run. The Landy years and what they did. Brian went back to the hospital in 1978 to get better. Psychosis and delusional schizophrenia were what the doctors said he had. But in the end, these findings were taken back. Gene Landy, one of his early therapists, didn't agree with those names. He believed Brian was just scared. In 1984, more doctors thought that drugs had hurt his brain. Besides that, they said he was crazy. Oh, around now. Brian got tics in his face. These are jerky moves that happen because of some strong medicines. Therapist Peter Rom told Brian's parents that he was taking too many drugs and could have become a drooling, paralyzed mental case. He thought Brian might have died of heart trouble if he had kept up with those drugs. In the end, Brian said, "I don't regret the Landy program. I like the guy. I was saved by him." Even though it was controversial, Brian thought Landy helped him get through one of the worst times of his life. Brian got a different diagnosis when he stopped being cared for by Landy. People who knew him said he had something called organic personality disorder. This refers to a mental illness brought on by brain damage. Brian's mental health got better over time, but the sounds kept coming back. The sounds were still there when he played live years later. He kept going though. He said that his second wife helped him get his life back on track. He said she gave him the drive to start making songs again. But Brian said things weren't great even in the 2000s. According to him, things are getting a little better now, but I'm not always in a good mood. Brian said something very sad in an interview in 2002. He thought that the medicine that helped his mind had also stopped him from being creative. He thought he couldn't write songs as well as he used to. Brian also had to deal with the fact that he couldn't hear properly in one ear when he was 11 years old and in a Christmas singing event. It was clear that something was wrong. They found that he had a lot of trouble hearing in his right ear. They said it was because of a nerve problem, but no one really knew what the real cause was. This problem made it hard for him to talk. Brian talked a lot from the side of his mouth. There were those who thought he had a stroke, but that wasn't true. Besides that, he had tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. He had surgery in the late 1960s to try to fix his hearing. It's too bad it didn't work. That ear of his hearing stayed the same. Brian Wilson kept making songs even though he had a mental illness, used drugs, and was partially deaf. It turned out that he paid a much higher price behind closed doors than anyone knew. Love and pain. Brian Wilson's first real relationship began in 1961. At a baseball game, he met Judy Bowles. They went out together for a while and got engaged in 1963. Their wedding was set to happen in December of that year. A lot of Brian's early songs, like Judy, Surfer Girl, and maybe even The Warmth of the Sun, were influenced by Judy. The couple broke up before they could get married, which was sad. Brian started seeing Marilyn Rovell around the same time that his relationship with Judy was ending. In August 1962, he met Marilyn. She was a singer, and the song, "Don't Hurt My Little Sister," came from their early friendship. The idea for that song came from something Marilyn's older sister Diane said. In December 1964, Brian got married to Marilyn. They had two girls named Carney and Wendy. They were born in 1968 and 1969. After that, the two girls became successful on their own as part of the singing group Wilson Phillips. Brian also wrote songs like "Roller Skating Child" and "Little Children" that were influenced by them. But even in those early years, home life wasn't always good. The problems in the marriage were shown in the words of the album Pet Sounds. In the end, Brian said he wasn't a good husband or father. He said that he was careless. He also told Marilyn to date other people, like the singer Tandon Almer. At the same time, Brian began seeing her sister Diane. That troubled relationship gave him the idea for the song My Diane. That wasn't all he did. Brian was seeing someone else at the same time. Her name was Debbie Keel. He wrote the song The Night Was So Young about her in 1977. Things between Brian and Marilyn were totally over by July 1978. After they broke up, Brian asked for a divorce in early 1979. Marilyn got to keep the kids and got half of Brian's songwriting earnings. After they got divorced, Brian dated Debbie Keel for a while longer, until around 1981. Brian met Carolyn Williams, one of his nurses, after his marriage ended and stayed with her until 1983. Around that time, singer Linda Ronstadt wrote in her autobiography that she had dated Brian for a short time in the 1970s, but she didn't go into specifics. He met Melinda Kay Ledbetter in 1986. They started dating at that time, but they broke up in 1989. Melinda thought it stopped early because Eugene Landy, Brian's controversial therapist and business partner at the time, got in the way. Love came back, though. Brian and Melinda got back together after 1991, and this time they stayed together. On February 6, 1995, they got married. She became more than just a wife. She also took over as his manager. They started a new life together by adopting 5 kids. It was 2012, and Brian had 6 grandkids. 4 of them were sons of Wendy. The drug said it caused ego death, which means Brian lost his sense of self during the event. By July 1965, Mike Love, Brian's bandmate, knew something was wrong. Brian caused an accident with his car one day. Love knew something wasn't right. Brian hid his drug use from most of the band, and even his Alan too were girls of Coach. Back with his family, Brian was in the middle of everything, with Melinda at the center. He said that she had helped him get his life back, both emotionally and professionally. Brian lost something important in 2024. January 30th was the last day Melinda lived. Brian wrote on the internet after she died, "She was my savior. I felt safe enough with her around to have a job. She told me to keep making the songs that meant the most to me." He felt a big hole in his life after Melinda died. She looked after him every day and took care of both his personal and professional needs. Brian's life got harder to handle without her, which made it harder for his family to make choices. Conservatorship and getting worse health. Brian's health quickly became a major worry after Melinda died. He went to court with his longtime boss Leanne Hard and his publicist Gene Sievers at the beginning of 2024. They asked to become Brian's formal guardians. The court agreed. An LA judge said Brian could no longer take care of himself. The judge said he needed help with his health, getting food, clothes, and a place to live. There were also court papers that showed Brian had dementia and was taking medicine to control it. Hard and Sievers were given the power to make decisions about Brian's medical care as conservators, but they had to talk to his kids, like Carney and Wendy, before making any big decisions. It was hard to time things right. Brian lost his wife a few months ago and was put in full-time care, but his kids were there for him. In May 2024, on the red carpet for the new Beach Boys documentary, they told fans what was going on. Carney told him that he was doing great. PT is something he does every day. I'm making him food. He has a lot of time to spend with his family and kids. In spite of everything, Wendy said, he's doing really well. He made it through. That's my dad. He's tough and strong. That night, Brian went to Hollywood to see the screening of the Beach Boys documentary. He even got back together with Mike Love, Al Jardine, David Marks, and Bruce Johnston, who were all in his old band. Even though he was sick, he showed up for his memory. His time was running out, though, which was sad. A few weeks later, the world got news that broke their hearts. Brian Wilson died on June 11, 2025. He was 82 years old. The news came from his family on social media. They wrote, "We know that we are sharing our sadness with the world. Love and mercy." At first, the reason of death wasn't made public, but after a few weeks, it was. Brian passed away in his home in Beverly Hills after stopping breathing, which is also known as respiratory arrest. The doctor report also talked about other health issues that led to his death. He got sepsis, which is a very bad infection that spread all over his body. He had been sick with cystitis, an illness of the bladder, for a few days. Along with obstructive sleep apnea, he was also dealing with a neurodegenerative problem and chronic respiratory failure and kidney disease. Over time, all of these things made his body weaker. Brian was burned at the stake and buried in Westwood, which is the same neighborhood where UCLA is. In a very private post, Carney Wilson talked about how she felt. She wrote, "I can't find the words to describe how sad I am right now. I feel blessed to have been his daughter and to have had a deep relationship with him that will last forever." She also said, "I've never felt this much pain before, but I know he's in heaven resting or maybe playing the piano for his mom, Grandma Audrey." Brian Wilson made a mark on music that will never be the same. But there was always a man, a father, a husband, a dreamer behind all the fame. He just wanted peace. Which song by Brian Wilson is very important to you, and why? Do you think Brian's problems made his music stronger, or do you think they were the sad price he paid for being so smart? Leave your thoughts in the box below. Please remember to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more amazing stories from the past of Hollywood. Have a nice trip.